I would be shocked if you told me that you did not know someone with diabetes. You may be experiencing it yourself. It's the number 7 cause of death in the United States. It's rather prevalent and growing. But do you really know what diabetes is? What are its causes, symptoms, and treatments? Today on the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast.
Welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast
with Garrett Williamson.
Health, wellness, exercise, nutrition, and a whole lot more. Got questions? Call us and leave a message at 251-278-EDGE or message us at Personal Edge Fitness on Facebook and Instagram, at Team PE on Twitter, or personaledgefitness.com.
Good day and welcome to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. So glad to have you listen to the show today. I thank you very much for joining us. My name is Garrett Williamson. I'm president of Personal Edge Fitness and the host of the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast. I want to thank you, as always, for those that have reached out and contacted us after our last podcast talking about 2 weeks to making a change in your brain and actually 2 weeks to losing 12.5 pounds. That's a pretty substantial number. And we had quite a few people join in to our In It to Lose It program, which we run every single month, and it's open to both members and non-members. But thank you for those individuals that contact us and started on that journey yesterday. And so we hope in 2 weeks they'll be very, very glad to have seen the changes that they've gone through and gotten the changes in the body that they want. If you have any questions about that program or this podcast or any podcast, or as the subtitle of the show is, Dispelling the Myths of Health, Fitness, and Wellness, if you have a question dealing with health, fitness, and wellness you've ever always pondered, you can always contact us at area code 251-278-3343. Again, that's 251-278-EDGE, 3343. You can reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. That's also our website, personaledgefitness.com, and it's also our Facebook page, Personal Edge Fitness. You can also reach me through Twitter at Team PE. Love to hear from you. Today starts another series. I've done a few series in my podcast, and I started really thinking about this when I was working on a new presentation, a new variation of a presentation I've done before, which is called The Live Food. I was working on revamping that, had been asked to speak at a couple locations on that particular subject. And in going through it, I really got diving headfirst into the causes of death. And I actually spoke about this. I did a podcast on the number 1 cause of death because I don't think it's not even listed in the top 10 causes. It turns out it's the number 1 cause. And what is that? Of course, it's obesity. In going through that, actually, this came about because of that. Also, it came about because I did the podcast on the vocabulary, on fitness vocabulary, and the fact that we say these words, a lot of times we don't know what they are. Well, I started relating that to the causes of death. Because we speak about different things, diabetes being one, and acting like, oh yeah, I've heard about that, I know what that is and whatever, but do we really? Do we really know what those are? And so this series is going to go through 4 of the top 10 causes of death because we speak about them like we know what they are, but I want to explain what each one of them is, their causes, their symptoms, their treatments, and also how it relates to what I was telling you is the number 1 killer, which is obesity. A recap for those who haven't heard that podcast, top 10 causes of death, as listed by the CDC. Number 1 is heart disease. Number 2 is cancer. Number 3 is accidents, just having basically an accident. Number 4 is lung disease. Number 5 is stroke. Number 6 is Alzheimer's. Number 7 is diabetes. Number 8 is flu or pneumonia. Number 9 is kidney disease. And number 10, sadly, is suicide. Now, of those, 4 of them, for heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and kidney disease, the number 1 risk factor for each one of those happens to be obesity. And I've said this before in that last podcast, and this is why I say that obesity is actually the number 1 killer. It also happens to be the number 9 risk factor for cancer, the number 7 risk factor for lung disease, and the number 2 risk factor for Alzheimer's. That one always blows my mind. But I'm just talking about these 4 today. I'm talking about one of the 4 today. We're going to do a series and we'll talk about each one of these because they really do need their own podcast. And I picked diabetes. And now it happens to be number 7. You would think I would start with number 1. But the reason I started with this is that it's so commonplace, it's almost like chicken pox to kids. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but it used to be a shocking diagnosis, but it's so prevalent now that, oh yeah, well, he's got diabetes. Oh yeah, no big deal. It's just diabetes. Well, I think we're looking at it too light. And one of the reasons we look at it too light is that we don't really understand what it is. So I'm going to go through some of that right now. And pardon the glasses today because some of this I want to make sure I get everything correct. And so I do have notes in front of me that some of these I'll be reading from because I want to make sure that I'm telling you exactly what each one of these factors of diabetes. I want to tell you the right thing. Let's put it that way. So diabetes is a chronic, long-lasting health condition that affects how your body turns food into energy. Now, I'm going to break that down in just a few minutes, but most of the food you eat is broken down into sugar, which is also referred to as glucose. COSE, or that OSE, usually when it has sucrose, glucose, when you see that OSE at the end, it is sugar related. And so you'll hear that used interchangeably. Well, my glucose is out of whack, my sugar's out of whack. Well, you're basically saying the same thing. But your food, when you eat, is broken down into sugar, glucose, and released into your bloodstream. When your blood sugar goes up, it signals your pancreas to release insulin. And insulin acts like a key to let the blood sugar into your body cells for use as energy. Now, I said I was going to break that down. What I mean, but think about this. All your life, you've probably known that when crude oil prices go up, well, you know what that means. That means gas prices are going to go up. But I remember as a kid thinking, well, I can understand why the oil price would go up, but the oil that I put in my car, but why does my gas price go up? Well, obviously what's happening is that they take crude oil and they send it to a refinery and they actually make gasoline out of that. That is why crude oil prices affect gas prices. And breaking that crude oil down into gasoline is the process we're talking about. That's what's going on in your body. Food is energy, yes, but unless we take that food and break it into sugar, break it down into glucose, the body can't use it. And then what happens? It just goes into the gas tank and it goes into the engine and what have you. Well, it goes into the cells. Glucose goes into the cells, and the regulator for that, to put it simply, is insulin. And it regulates, it acts like to let as I'm reading here, let the blood sugar into your body cell to use for energy. If you have diabetes, your body either doesn't do one of two things. This is where it gets a little bit confusing. Either doesn't make enough insulin, or it can't use the insulin it makes as well as it should. This is why you hear a lot of, when you hear diabetes, you hear people talk about insulin a lot. And this is why they're talking about that. This is probably why diabetes is so confusing, is because it has to do with your body's use of insulin. Either it can't make enough, like I say, or it can't use the insulin it makes as well as it should. When there isn't enough insulin, or your cells stop responding to the insulin, too much blood sugar stays in your bloodstream. It basically can't be broken down. Over time, that can cause serious health problems like, heart disease, vision loss. Your eyes are very, very susceptible to elevated blood sugar levels. Also, kidney disease, which, like I said earlier, happens to be the 9th cause of death. When you've heard diabetes talked about, you've probably heard of two types of diabetes. There's actually a couple more, but the two that you hear about, of course, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is, again, it's a chronic condition, and this involves the pancreas. It's where the pancreas produces little or no insulin. And remember what I said earlier, that your body doesn't make enough insulin or can't use the insulin that it makes. In this condition, the pancreas produces little or no insulin, so it's not making enough insulin. Some of the symptoms you get when you have type 1 diabetes are increased thirst, frequent urination, hunger, sudden weight loss, and even weakness. Now, type 1 diabetes, I'm going over this one first because this is the one that isn't as prevalent. And I'll get to those numbers in a second, but it's not as prevalent. The exact cause of it is not known. I like the way when I was reading the material, they actually said it's not known. I would much rather hear that than health professionals or scientists chalk something up to, well, it must be genetics. Because I really think so many times we use genetics explanation as just the be-all, end-all, and cure-all. I don't have another answer. It must be genetics. In this case, they're saying that the exact cause of the condition is not known. In other words, there's a lot of research going on, still trying to find the answer, which I greatly appreciate because the human body is the most complicated machine that you will ever encounter, and we don't know everything about it. And I don't like it when we conclude that we think we do, because we don't. Type 1 diabetes is a result of an autoimmune destruction of pancreatic cells that produce insulin. And it's not always autoimmune destruction. You can have damage to your pancreas. It will cause insulin dependency. It actually caused type 1 diabetes. I knew of an individual, he was in his late 20s. His pancreas was damaged during surgery. It actually brought about type 1 diabetes. They say genetics plays a role in type 1 diabetes. I do believe it can play a role. I do think our DNA, I think there's, you get certain things from your mother and father, and yes, it can play a role. The risk factors, we'll speak about risk factors really quick. Risk factors is another phrase that's misunderstood, because we think that risk factor means cause. Risk factor doesn't always mean cause. In fact, risk factor, the definition of it is either a cause or a correlation. And the difference, of course, is the fact that when you're talking about damage to the pancreas, that's a cause. That's a risk factor that is a cause. You have damage to the pancreas, and that actually can cause type 1 diabetes. But when you say things like age, in type 1 diabetes, the children between the ages of 4 and 7 years old are at higher risk, and they also say that in 10 years and 14 years are at higher risk, and that's a risk factor. That's actually a correlation. In other words, they're finding more children in between those ages that have type 1 diabetes. That's where they're diagnosing it. So it's not like, something magically happened at that year of your life that caused, that time on the calendar caused that. No, it's just that they're finding more evidence of it there. And so there's a correlation with the age. Most likely, the reason there's a correlation with age is there happen to be commonalities in everybody's lifestyle or development or feeding or either nutrition, fitness, or lifestyle that's actually happens during that same amount of time, that same time in your life, which is why they're seeing type 1 diabetes. Number on the calendar doesn't actually cause it. It's just a correlation. Genetics, again, and of course family history, and I put family history and genetics in the same boat. This is one that is insulin dependent, so it can be treated with diet and what have you, because again, you do have to control your diet when you have type 1 diabetes, but there's also lifestyle modifications, what I was just talking about, but taking insulin. That's when you usually have somebody that's insulin dependent diabetes, that's type 1 diabetes, and they're taking insulin to keep their blood sugar under control. This is not typically brought on, and in fact, it's not really brought on by obesity, and it's the least common type of diabetes. So I'm going to move on quickly to type 2 because that's really what I want to discuss here. Type 2 diabetes, your body doesn't use insulin well and can't keep blood sugar at normal levels. Now, I was talking about the type 1 is not one you hear about as much. Type 2 is something that is far more prevalent. Most likely, you definitely know somebody that has type 2 diabetes. You may or may not know someone that has type 1. And the reason for that is about 90 to 95% of the people with diabetes have type 2. Now, I'm going to bring that back up in a few minutes and make a real key point on it. So don't forget, about 90 to 95% of people with diabetes have type 2. It develops over many years and is usually diagnosed in adults. It's amazing that they're still putting this next comment in parentheses, because I think we can take the parentheses away. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes has gone out of control with the new population. And I've been saying that for over 14 years now. So it's not that new a population, because more and more children, teens, and young adults are developing diabetes. I don't think that I'm letting any cat out of the bag there. If you haven't heard that, I'm not sure which rock you've been living under, because we're seeing that more and more. It used to be that you didn't contract diabetes until later in life, and that was listed as a quote unquote risk factor. In other words, a correlation. But now we're seeing it in young kids, and it's not obviously because of one reason only, and I'll get to that in a minute. You may not notice any symptoms, so it's important to get your blood sugar tested if you are at risk. There's ways, there's signs, there's things that you can look at in your lifestyle and your body shape and your body type, energy levels, these kind of things that will give you cause and give you reason to have it checked. And these are symptoms: frequent urination, increased thirst, fatigue, tiredness, sudden weight loss, but also an enormous weight gain. Sudden weight loss is a sign of that you have diabetes, but a pre-diabetes, which they believe that more than 1 in 3 people have pre-diabetes. That's when you're already having those symptoms there. And so you're headed down that road. We see a lot of people that have pre-diabetes or have been diagnosed as pre-diabetes. It's a major warning flag thrown up by their physician. And that can be through blood testing that you figure that out. That's another way of testing and finding out. But if you see a lot of adipose tissue, in other words, your body fat is really high, forget about BMI, concentrate on body fat. If your body fat is very, very high, you're susceptible for being possibly already pre-diabetes and having diabetes. Something else that is I never knew this symptom of diabetes, but itching around the genitals. I had no idea, but that is a symptom. Slow healing cuts or wounds. That's a big red flag. A lot of people notice that first and foremost. They'll notice that they're not healing, their simple cuts, scratches, whatever, are not healing as fast as they used to, and that is a huge symptom of type 2 diabetes. And again, back what I was saying earlier, your vision is highly susceptible to high sugar, high blood sugar, and so blurred vision Blurred vision is a warning sign for type 2 diabetes. The causes of it. I'm going to go to those risk factor things. Keep in mind what I told you about risk factors. They're either causal or they're a correlation. And so this is, yes, it's my opinion on the causal and correlation, but I think you'll see where it's easy to draw these conclusions. The number one risk factor, like I've said before, the number one risk factor for 4 of the top 10 causes of death. And in diabetes, it's one of the 4. Number one risk factor is, of course, obesity. And that is causal. That is not a correlation. That is causal. And why is it causal? Well, when you're taking in way too much, you're overloading the system. That's when your cells kind of freak out and they have difficulty regulating that insulin. It actually can happen in your brain too. And so that's what throws everything off kilt. So many people draw the conclusion because of the lie of food that, this food's good, that food's bad, that sugar causes diabetes. No, it's an overabundance. It's an overabundance. And then once you develop diabetes, now you have to regulate your sugar. You have to watch and really closely regulate your sugar. So sugar doesn't really cause it. Over amounts, obesity, which is an amount. It's not a type, it's an amount, can cause that. So sedentary lifestyle, believe it or not, I believe sedentary lifestyle is a correlation, not a cause. Now, you may think I'm wrong about that, especially since I sell exercise for a living. But it's a correlation because if you're eating for your lifestyle, in other words, if you're not very active, but you eat for a not very active lifestyle, you're most likely not going to end up with type 2 diabetes. But if you're an active and you're eating for an active lifestyle, that's when you can develop type 2 diabetes. So I argue that's a correlation, not a causal risk factor. I'm going to skip one of them and I'm going to go to the age. Age, definitely a correlation. Absolutely a correlation. And we've proved that now. We've had to change that correlation. We've had to change that risk factor and add the younger ages. So age is strictly a correlation. We're seeing this a lot once people hit the age of 45, but now we're seeing a lot of people younger. And the real cause of it is the overeating that's going on, the obesity. So age is strictly a correlation. So prediabetes, obviously causal. Prediabetes is you're headed there. You're already doing everything you need to do to become type 2 diabetic. So therefore, obviously, prediabetes is causal. Gestational diabetes is also causal. In my mind, you already have diabetes if, of course, you have gestational diabetes. And this is when blood sugar is too high during your pregnancy. It's usually diagnosed somewhere around the 24th to 28th week, and it can cause problems. It can cause problems not only in the mother, but also in the baby. And then polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, this was a new one on me. And this is when ovaries produce too many follicles, which are basically eggs. This is causal because that condition, though they don't know the actual cause of that condition, it is related to insulin resistance. Your body is insulin resistant with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Therefore, obviously, that's causal and a big risk factor for type 2 diabetes. How is it diagnosed? Well, it can be done with a simple blood test. And they're basically measuring the sugar in your blood to see if you have that. And of course, you're looking at if you have the symptoms too, but that's how you test and know for sure if you have type 2 diabetes, if your blood sugar is too high. Treatments for it are medications. There are medications that can help you moderate your glucose levels and what have you, but there's not a medical cure for diabetes. There's not a medicine you can take to cure diabetes. All the medicines you hear about and they're talking about diabetes aren't something to cure diabetes. They're something just to manage diabetes. And the number one way, of course, to treat it is controlling your lifestyle and diet and fitness. What's neat about it is that you can get that completely under control through that lifestyle modification. Now, here's why I was bringing up the fact that you've got 90 to 95% of people that you know that have diabetes have type 2 diabetes, not type 1. And the reason I bring that up is this is the argument you're going to hear me make on all 4 of these causes of death that I'm going to discuss. The argument that I'm going to make is if you take obesity out of the equation, would any of these 4 even rank in the top 10 causes of death? This is Garrett's opinion, and the reason I say it's my opinion is because I have not done the research yet to look at the numbers, and it would be simple mathematical equation. We have the number of deaths that we experience of all these top 10. That's how they rank them. And so if we looked at the number of people that have diabetes, and we took that number of people that have diabetes, and we took 90 to 95% of them out of the equation, since the number one cause of type 2 diabetes is obesity. if you were able to take 90 to 95% of those numbers out of diabetes, would it even rank? I mean, right now it's number 7. Would it even be on the chart? Would we even discuss it? Would you even know anybody that had diabetes if we removed obesity from the equation? I think that's so important, and it's part of the reason why I'm going through this series and talking about these different causes of death. First thing, I want you to understand what they are, because so many of them are, in most cases, if not all cases, in most cases are preventable. Obviously, in type 1, they're not, but in type 2 diabetes, that's largely preventable. And if you look at the other 3 that we're going to talk about, you're going to realize that they're almost completely preventable. But would they even rank in the top 10? And if you understand what they are and you understand how you can control it, well, then you'll have less of a path to actually attaining one of these diseases, attaining one of these problems. The argument I've made several times, and you see it here in diabetes, that diabetes really isn't the cause of death. It's obesity. It boils down to obesity. And so controlling obesity and controlling our intake of food and making sure that our expenditure of calories either is even with our intake of calories or is more than our intake of calories, we won't have any of these problems. So there's some pretty profound statements. There's some pretty profound comments I'm making on that. If you have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out to me at area code 251-278-3343. You can also reach me at Garrett, Garrett, at personaledgefitness.com. And of course, that's our website, personaledgefitness.com, and our Facebook page. Trying to avoid diabetes, especially type 2 diabetes, just one more way we help you live your level of wellness. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for listening to the Personal Edge Fitness Podcast with Garrett Williamson. Subscribe now and be a part of the show by calling 251-278-EDGE or message us on Facebook and Instagram at Personal Edge Fitness or at Team PE on Twitter, and visit us at personaledgefitness.com.